Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, depending on from which part of the world you are joining us today. We're delighted to host you today at the WFH Development Grant Program webinar on how to write a proposal. My name is Salome Mehuzla. I'm the Regional Development Director at the WFH. At the WFH team here, we have with us today Ms. Dawn Rotellini, who is the member of the Board of Directors of the WFH. Many of you know her. Dawn is the Senior Vice President of Program Development at the National Hemophilia Foundation in the United States, and she also serves as the Chair of the Development Grant Selection Committee. We also have my colleague, Ms. Jessica Tavares, who is part of the Regional Development Team and is responsible for the Development Grant Program Administration, who also helped us to organize the webinar today. The objectives of this webinar are to provide an overview of the Development Grant Program, including the application process, the selection criteria, and the other useful information, such as what are the next steps coming up and on the kind of activities that can be funded or not, and so on. I will cover that part of the presentation. Then the second and the main objective of the webinar today is to present the key elements of developing a project application or a proposal. And Dawn will be the main presenter for that part of the webinar. Last but not the least, we would like to offer you an opportunity to ask questions and or provide comments. So at the end of the webinar, we have time reserved for the Q&A session. So the first polling question is, what region of the world are you from? So we have the results here. So we have 21% of the participants today from Africa, 21% exactly also from Europe and Central Asia, and then 14%, wow, very equally divided between Central America and Caribbean, North America and South America. And we also have 7% from South Asia, East Asia, and Southeast Asia, Western Pacific. Thank you very much. So I will move to the next polling question. Did you submit a project proposal in 2018? So last year, as you remember, we had the first call for applications for the Development Grants Program. So we're wondering if you participated in it last year. So we have 81% responded that no, they have not submitted, and 18% that you have submitted. Thank you. So I will move to the next question. Do you plan on submitting a project proposal this year? Oh, wow. Okay. So we have 100% yes. Thank you. And then the last polling question is, has your organization previously developed project proposals for other grant programs? 85% responded yes and 14% no. So this is great because we have quite an experienced audience. So this concludes the polling questions. So now I will move on to the overview of the Development Grant Program. We did present the program last year at the Congress, at the different regional meetings and other events as well. The main objective of the program and why WFH developed it is to encourage new and innovative ideas and projects that address unmet needs or a specific problem in your bleeding disorder community. The program is open to all national member organizations, and it is designed to support projects that are up to 24 months duration, and the maximum funding available per project could be $25,000 US. As to the specific objectives of the program, it is designed to assist you, the national member organizations, in developing and strengthening your skills. So in a way, it is a capacity building tool as well. It is designed to provide tools to help you, your NMOs, to create and implement new and sustainable healthcare development projects, and to empower you to better advocate and support the improvement of bleeding disorder care in your countries. We have developed specific criteria in order for us to be able to evaluate and select the projects. And you will see here the first criteria is thematic So the projects that are related to the WFH Comprehensive Development Model and the strategic plan, and are also relevant for other activities of the association. I will speak a little more about the development model and the strategic priorities in the next slide. The projects which have clearly defined SMART objectives, and Dawn will cover that in her part of the presentation. Projects that address local patient organization or the country needs. Of course, the projects have to be relevant to the needs of your local community. Proposal merits and innovative approaches. So how innovative is the approach that you're proposing in your project? How well and well defined and clear is the proposal itself? And then projects that contribute to longer term sustainable improvements and to improvement and increase access to comprehensive care in your countries. And of course, the cost effectiveness of the proposal. So how relevant and how justifiable is the budget in line to the set objectives of the project. Now let's move to the focus areas again. So I've mentioned the WFH development model. I hope all of you are familiar with it. So I will briefly describe the 6 pillars of the model. The model serves for WFH in all aspects of our programming. We use it as a guide to evaluate the situation, assess situation in the countries before we start a program, as well as to assess the situation afterwards to see whether we have improved in certain of these areas. So the first area is to achieve government support through advocacy. Second pillar is about improving care delivery, and this mainly implies the organization of care. And the third one is about improving medical expertise and increasing accurate diagnosis of bleeding disorders. Next is to increase access to safe treatment products, to build a strong national patient organization through capacity building, and to track national demographic data. And under national demographic data, we imply both the general, let's say, national patient registries, but also more elaborate registries that can track data on health outcomes, let's say. So obviously the main objective of tracking the national demographic data is to use this data for advocacy, to make the case for better care. As to the WFH strategic plan, as you all know, we have currently 2018-2020 strategic plan, and we have identified 3 main strategic priorities for us to focus on for the next 2 years. These are to improve outreach and diagnosis of people with bleeding disorders, to increase access to sustainable and safe therapies, and to increase access to adequate and affordable care. You will have found this information also in the application, in the program guidelines, where we describe the types of activities, projects, or types of costs that are not eligible for funding. We wanted to make sure we include this information to help you guide in defining specific activities or preparing the budget of your proposal. So the types of costs or activities that are not eligible for funding are payment of salaries, the operating costs such as office rent, projects that seek to generate income, obviously, purchase or production of treatment products, projects focusing solely on infrastructure development or improvement, ongoing or completed projects where expenses have already been incurred, or the academic research or scientific publications. And finally, what is the process this year for the call for applications? As you know, we've announced the call for applications mid-March, and you have about 2 months to to submit the project proposals. The deadline is May 24th. We will have the meeting of the Development Grant Selection Committee end of June, when the committee members get together and they review the applications and select the ones that are approved for funding this year. and we will be able to communicate final decisions to all applicants by mid-July. So these are the steps that are left in the call for application for this year and the timeline. Having said that, I've completed my part of the presentation. I would like to thank you and wish you good luck with your proposals. If at the end of this webinar you feel that there were questions that were unanswered or we did not cover sufficiently, we really ask you and urge you to contact us via email, and we will gladly provide you additional information or clarification. With that, I will hand over to Dawn. Thank you.
Thank you, Salome. So it's my pleasure to be with you here this morning, and we are going to just dive right into developing the project application. So the first thing that you really need to be thinking about is your problem statement. Given the guidelines of WFH that Salome just went through, what is the specific problem that you wish to address through this project? And how can this issue be tackled? Meaning, how can you approach this problem and what are you going to try to do? Oftentimes, when you have the opportunity to apply for grant funds, it is very tempting to say, I want to do everything on my wish list. You might be thinking, maybe if I say I will change the world, they'll give me the $25,000. In reality, the opposite is true. When there are limited funds, the funder, in this case, it's WFH, wants to know that you will actually accomplish your goals. So when you create your problem statement, be very specific and think, how can this problem or issue be changed or fixed? In fact, I'll use VWD, von Willebrand's disease, as an example. The problem in my country is that VWD is not being diagnosed. Then that's the problem statement. But think, how can I or my NMO begin to make a change in this problem? So we want to look at our goals. Your goal must be achievable. If you say, I want every person with VWD to be identified in my country, but you do not have a treatment center or a doctor that will diagnose women, is that goal really achievable? It's a great wish, but not something that will happen in a 24-month period of time. In this case, you may want to have one goal that educates the doctors in your country about VWD and the importance of diagnosis. Goal setting is learned through gathering data and analyzing that data in focused planning. Through this planning process, a roadmap is defined and identified. So what is the goal of your project? As you can see here, you can see that there are things tied to goals. Sometimes our goals are very, very broad. Sometimes they're very general. Sometimes they're so abstract that people don't really understand what you're trying to achieve. Sometimes they're intangible, meaning it's going to be very difficult to achieve them. And ultimately, sometimes we create goals that are very difficult to measure. So we want you to think about this. When you write down your initial goal, ask, is it too broad? What are my general intentions? How did I come to this goal? Did I do any analysis or research to back up my goal? Is my goal so abstract that no one else understands what I'm trying to accomplish? And how can I reword this so people understand? Is my goal something that can be achieved by doing an activity? And lastly, how can I actually measure the results of success? Is it by number of attendees? Is it by changing in attitudes? When you write a grant, you must be accountable to do what you say you are going to do. So you have to ask yourself, what is my plan of action to achieve my goal? So it's sometimes confusing to decide what is the difference between a goal and an objective. So I want to go over this a little bit with you because goals and objectives are both very good to try to achieve in a grant cycle. So a goal is an overarching vision of what you want to accomplish. An objective is the path to achieve it. Example, a goal to promote awareness about von Willebrand's disease in my country. Okay, that's the overarching goal statement. I want to promote awareness about VWD. The objective might be to provide 10 one-hour presentations to OBGYNs in hospitals in our major cities. That's an example of an objective. Or maybe it's, I want to distribute 200 brochures about VWD and our NMO to 20 hospitals and doctors' offices. So there are two kinds of objectives, process and impact outcome objectives. A process objective is describing participants, interactions, activities, and process objectives include numbers and types of activities. Impact or outcome objectives describe the actual changes in attitude. You might be changing knowledge or behavior in the short term. Sometimes it describes a long-term implication of your program on the broader community, but these are rarely measurable. So when we're looking at a grant, we really want to look at mostly process objectives. So what are the objectives of your project? This is where we get into SMART goals. So as you can see, we often interchange the word goal and objective, but remember your goal is the broader overarching thing you want to achieve, and the objective is the path to achieve it. So what are the objectives of your project? Your objectives should be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic or relevant, and time-bound. As you see, the initials here, SMART, that is what SMART goals are. This is how we use that term. So identifying SMART objectives. Let's talk about specific. What do I want to accomplish? So what you want to do with a SMART objective is to state precisely in performance terms what you want to do. Use action verbs like increase, reduce, improve, decrease, etc. So you want to say in your SMART objective, right? You want to be specific. I want to educate 200 providers on X, right? It is, I want to increase diagnosis for the population by 5%, that kind of thing. And then state who is involved, what is involved in that process. The M, identifying measurable goals, right? Measurable objectives. Can you track the progress and measure the outcome? You have to ask yourself, what does accomplishment look like? If I achieve my goal, if I achieve my objective, what does it look like? So establish concrete metrics for monitoring progress and attainment. Again, using numbers. My goal is percentage. I want to increase the percentage of X, or I want to hand out 250 brochures to 20 hospitals. Very specific. At the end of that goal, you can tell, did I actually accomplish this? The measurement is clear and specifically stated. It's also realistic and feasible. Remember, sometimes it's very tempting to say, I want to diagnose 100% of people with bleeding disorders in my country. Of course, that is really our goal, right? Because at the end of the day, if we can diagnose, we can get people treatment. But is that realistic and is that feasible? So our measurement focuses on outcomes and not activities. You do have to know, though, your pathway to get to the activity. The A stands for achievable. Are the objectives reasonable enough to be achieved within this project, resources, and timeline? So let's think about that. Can the goal really be achieved in 24-month period of time? Because remember, that's the life of the grant. So sometimes our goals are so big because we really know what we want to accomplish. But in reality, the goal might take 5 years to complete. So take a part of that goal and then outline that in your grant request. The goal or objective has to be within the scope of your influence. Ask yourself, can I really control this? Can I actually make the impact? Or do I need to actually establish a relationship in the government first? So that might be part of your grant, is to have appointments. How many appointments? How long will those appointments be? Do I have an adequate resources available to achieve this goal? Can the grant money cover all the activities? If not, where does the other money come from? The R stands for realistic and relevant. Can I realistically reach my objectives? Are the project objectives relevant to the local needs? So what is the purpose? Remember, bringing yourself back. What is the purpose of my goal? And what is the benefit? What is the outcome that I want to achieve? And sometimes it's easy to look at money that's being offered and say, oh, I want to align this with WFH's, mission or objectives. So I'm going to go ahead and create something that I think they want me to do. But in reality, does that actually align with where you are at your NMO, with your mission and your vision? Make sure that they align well, because remember, you have to accomplish this. There is accountability. So does this realistic objective focus on actual outcomes, or does it focus on the task that you want to do? It's good to outline what the steps are to get to your goal, but remember, we want to measure the outcome. And did you describe why the outcome is important and why it's relevant to your local needs? These are the questions that you have to ask yourself. The T stands for time bound. When is this objective going to be achieved? So when does it need to be completed? Is there enough time in the grant period for you to achieve this? It's okay, remember, to break things down into smaller sections. Identify a realistic target completion date, and then outline the tasks to accomplish this within that time frame. And also, you really need a plan to monitor your progress. If you write down, sometimes when I'm writing a goal, I look at my calendar and I'll figure out, what is my goal? Okay, here's the end date. And then I'll work backwards on that calendar to figure out what are the dates that I need to achieve each and everything. That actually helps keep me focused so that I can check myself and I can look at my calendar and say, oh, wow, in a month, I need to have distributed 250 brochures in different localities in my country. Well, did I allow enough time to travel and go between each one and have meetings with these people to be able to get the brochures out? So that's how I do it myself, but I'm sure you have maybe a different way to do it. That's fine, but make sure you outline that so that it meets the timeline. And make sure, again, that you're monitoring your own progress so suddenly you don't get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, I've run out of time to do this. So I want to take a minute really quickly. I've got a question here on the side, and it said, it's from Nelson, and he is asking, in this moment, we're implementing a cornerstone initiative. Is it possible to participate in the program? On their action plan, they have other active as a national conference of hemophilia and theater in the hospital. Salome, is that something that you want to address right now?
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Yes, Nelson, your answer to your question is yes. You could apply for a development grant program funding as well. So being part of the Cornerstone Initiative, GAP program, country program, or any other WFH program does not prevent any NMOs to apply for this project. The only case when an NMO cannot apply, if you're already currently implementing one development grant program, let's say if you applied last year and would have received funding, you would have to complete the current development grant project first, and only afterwards you're eligible to apply second time in future.
Perfect. Thank you. I wanted to make sure, we had a chance to answer that question. And thank you, Nelson, for submitting your question. So let's talk about the basically you're projecting your expected results. The expected results should be directly linked, remember, to your problem statement and your project objectives. And in a summary, those project objectives should really match those SMART goals. So have I outlined, you have to ask yourself, have I outlined the desired outcomes and the clear goals and objectives? And how do I show how we got there? If you have planned well, then evaluation of the results should be something that you've been thinking about during your planning process. All along the way, you've got to think about, how do I evaluate how the process is going? And did I accomplish my goals? One thing about evaluation, if you have an idea about something you want to accomplish and you didn't make the objective, right? You didn't meet your goals. Does that mean that the project failed? Actually, in reality, not necessarily. What it might mean is that along the way you're evaluating and you didn't realize that you were going to have a very difficult time getting a meeting with the head of the hospital. And getting this meeting with the head of the hospital was one of the big problems that you had in accomplishing your task. However, maybe you learned in the meantime, there was someone else who was an advocate in that hospital that could help you achieve the goal, and you figured a way to go around that. That would be a really good thing that you found in your evaluation. So just don't be thinking like, because I didn't hit my numbered goal that I originally stated, but you learned along the way to be able to learn, how to do this and accomplish your goals in the future. That's actually a really well-learned lesson. So expected results. So I'm just giving you an example here. Before you entered into this grant program, hemophilia was not a priority for your government. But after you entered into this grant program, hemophilia was actually included in the list of non-communicable diseases and funding allocated for purchase of treatment products in the national healthcare budget. Wow, that is an awesome result and an example. But in your grant, you also want to show the pathway of how you got there. One of the best things we can do is to help each other at NMOs. For example, if this was your result afterwards, you would want to be able to share that with WFH and other NMOs to help them know how you got to that goal and that accomplishment. To project activities, again, this is repeating this, but it's really important. Your project activities need to be clearly defined, linked to your objective, and feasible. So we have a quick question. What if an NMO has managed to get the funding, but will need more time to complete the program? Will you allow that? Salome, do you want to talk about that?
Yes, thank you, Dawn. Of course, we would prefer that you stay on within the timeline of the proposed project. But we understand that circumstances can change, and sometimes they don't depend on us. So this could be external factors. So if you provide a reasonable explanation throughout the reporting process on why you require an extension, we would be able to grant it. It of course depends case by case. So what is the situation and what is the reason for requesting the extension? But this is one of the reasons also why we've made the project timeline flexible as well. I remember from the first round of applications when we received many project proposals, and some of them, when we approved them, the original proposals were for 6 to 12 months duration. But we went back to the NMOs, some of you, and with some feedback. And afterwards, actually, when some of you resubmitted, you yourself changed the timeline to the maximum. So it's better to take more time and be more realistic rather than overestimate what can be achieved in a certain timeline. We also understand that many of you are volunteers, so keep that in mind. What are your resources, and how realistic is the timeline you're proposing?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And thank you, Moses, for your question. Yeah. I also think that it's really important when you're thinking about your time to complete the program. If you are monitoring yourself all the way along, you should know in 6 to 12 months that you're actually not going to be able to accomplish it. So I think communication with WFH is key. So if you're 12 months into your project and you gave yourself 24 months to complete it, but you recognize that you are not halfway through, then it's time to reevaluate and look at your timeline, and look at your actual objectives. So you could reach back out to Salome and say, boy, it looks like this isn't going to happen. And here's why. Here's the monitoring we've been doing. And I think as you're tracking your results, then that will help you stay on track, but will also tell you if you're not on track and why. And I think that that information is really important to share back to your funder. And this is, in this case, of course, it's WFH that's the funder. But if you apply for any manufacturing grants, from the companies, this is also a very good practice to always communicate with your funder what's going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about budget. The project application form, the budget is very, very important. The budget items should be detailed and related to each project activity. And I really want to emphasize this because in the first round of grant applications, some people submitted an overall budget. For example, everyone went for the maximum amount of money, okay? And everyone went for goals and objectives that were really, really large, that were going to be really hard to accomplish in 12 months. So they might say, for example, I want to diagnose all people with VWD in my country. I want $25,000 to do it. But there were no activities or breakdown of the budget to get there. In that case, it's very hard for the grant committee to discern what is it that you're really trying to do and how are you going to get there. So this example that you have on your screen is a perfect example. So in this case, the example is training for the NMO chapter leaders. Okay, so however many chapter leaders you have in your country. So you need to know how many people that is overall. What is your percentage of chapter leaders that you're going to train? Are you going to train 100% of them? That might be a goal and that might be achievable, but how are you going to do that? So be thinking about that. Then in your budget description, we need to see specific. So I need $60 for transportation costs for 5 people, right? $60 each for them to get to the training or the meeting. That's $300. Rental of the meeting space. In this case, it's $800. Accommodation and meals for 20 participants for 2 days. That's $900. As you can see, every single piece is broken down. Now, we could have said in this case, I want to train NMO chapter leaders, and the cost is going to be $2,000. But that doesn't tell me that you've thought through the whole process. The budget description and the line item that you allocate money to each and every line item is so important so that we can see, oh, wow, you've really thought through this. You know where your costs are going to be. And this tells me that you've thought through it and you'll be able to achieve it. So project monitoring and evaluation. We want to talk about, the project KPIs, the potential risks. And remember, we talked about sometimes there's risks in this, right? Because you have great big goals and you can achieve it. But sometimes along the way, there was an assumption we made and there might be a risk that we've taken thinking we're going to get through this project and achieve our goals. And again, that's okay because that's a learning opportunity. But then think about sustainability. What we really want out of these goal proposals, out of these project proposals, is that this is sustainable for your NMO. We want to know that you will continue to be able to make this impact past the 24 months. So that's really important to think about. What are your roadblocks? What are the corrections that you made along the way? Make sure you document those. When you don't achieve all your goals, but you learn enough to do it better the next time, sometimes that's just as valuable. And when you monitor your progress, you monitor before, during, and afterwards. There really should be no surprises. Even if, a meeting doesn't go the way you wanted it to go, then you always have a plan B and a next step in mind and monitoring that. And when we say monitor, it just really means make sure you're documenting, write it down, include it in your grant report. So we want to talk about the KPIs, the key performance indicators. Key performance indicators are the specific measurement tools that will help you determine if your objectives have been achieved through the implementation of the project. So you can see that, right? On the top of that diagram, there's measurement, there's evaluation. And by the way, evaluation is not just at the very end. You're evaluating the entire time. You're evaluating each step along the way. How did that go? In the case we showed before with the budget, where it was training NMO leaders, you want to evaluate. How did that go? What could I change in the future? Did people actually implement what they said they were going to do? So it's evaluate and follow up. What was your objective? Did your objective get met? How was the performance in these objectives? And how did you decide what to measure? So you can see it's a cycle. You will go through this cycle the entire time you implement your grant. Our key performance indicators. So here's an example. The project is capacity building on laboratory diagnosis. So what we want to measure is the number of institutions that diagnose rare inherited bleeding disorders. Okay? So this is a number. We want to increase. Remember, we're using that verb, increase. And we want to make sure that more places can diagnose inherited bleeding disorders. And why do we want to do that? Well, because without diagnosis, people can't get access to care and treatment. So here's another one. Project is awareness raising on MSK care for patients with bleeding disorders. What are we going to measure? This is a key performance indicator, the number of patients seeking or receiving MSK care. So you may know what the total population should be of those diagnosed in your country. What is the actual diagnosis, right? And what is the number of patients that are actually getting care? And then how much do you actually want to increase that? Is it by percentage or number? In this case, if I were part of a country that had a large population, I may say that I want to increase patients getting care by 3%. That might be a big increase depending on your population. If you are in a country that has a low population and you know really probably you only have, say, 50 families affected, but you've only got 5 diagnosed, well, then maybe you're going to say, I want to have 5 additional patients get care. So those are the things that you have to consider. Here's another example. Outreach. The project is outreach to identify people with bleeding disorders. So your KPIs, your key performance indicators in this case, are the number of newly identified people with hemophilia and the number of newly identified people with VWD. Hopefully that helps you figure out, what kind of measurements that you can have. So we are in the Q&A part. We've been answering some of the questions along the way. And I'm going to turn this over to Salome for any other thoughts before we get to question and answers. But I really encourage you guys to type in your questions and submit them so that we can answer them. Sometimes it's intimidating to type in a question because you think I'm the only one thinking it. But I will guarantee you, if you have the question, everybody has the question. Salome, do you want to give any comments?
Yes, thank you very much, Dawn, for the presentation. And yes, that's a good point. Sometimes we feel uncomfortable to ask some questions, but I'm sure that others have similar questions, but are not asking. So please ask it. It's helpful for everyone. And we are a little bit ahead of time. We had planned more conservatively, so we have time to answer questions. One thing while we are waiting for a few questions to come in, I wanted to add is that in a week after this webinar, we will be able to share re-recording of this webinar with the presentation itself and the audio, which will have subtitles also in French and Spanish. So you can refer back to that if you have not taken notes or want to refer back to some specific points mentioned today. But also very important, this year we've developed a new document which we did not have last year to help you in completing the applications. The document is the project application guide. We had sent it out together with the announcement of the call for applications to all the national member organizations, and this document provides detailed information for the applicants on how to complete the project application form. So literally there is every question from the form in this document, and each question in this guide corresponds with the questions listed in the project application form, and it provides explanation, some of the explanation that was presented today also on how to complete it, what are the, let's say, SMART objectives, so on and so forth, and it also includes many examples. So just to give you some ideas.
So Tirsa from Honduras, warm greetings to all. My question is, if we can we present proposals that are related to other projects that the WFH is supporting in the NMO? Also, if one proposal is not accepted, can we make corrections and changes and present it in a future opportunity? Great question.
Yes, very good question. So if you present the proposal that is related, just be cautious that it is not seen as it is overlapping with an ongoing other project that WFH is supporting in your country. That's something important, of course, something for the committee members would keep in mind. So it could be on a related topic, but it should not be overlapping directly with other program. And if you've submitted a proposal that was not successful on this round of the application, you cannot resubmit the same proposal. It would have to be significantly different, improved, or a new proposal for future.
Sounds good. And thank you, Salome, for answering that. And then Sergio from Nicaragua says, we recommend to improve the system of response of the applications to know when projects are approved or rejected, and suggested that a web app may help. And I will just give my own opinion. I agree that the system of responsive applications is very important to know whether you get funded or not. I think Salome outlined in the beginning of this presentation the deadlines, and we have in the last cycle we had many applications, and we Salome and her team immediately notified everyone whether they were funded or not funded. And I agree a web app might help, but then that means that's money that isn't being given to the NMO, but going towards the web app. So I think that we can definitely stay on top of notifying you about the projects that are approved or rejected. And also it might be helpful for us to share the projects that are approved and or rejected, actually maybe more approved, just so you can see the things that are being done in other countries. That might be really helpful for you. Salome, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, definitely. This is a good idea to share information on the projects approved. I think that could be useful. I'm not sure if the question implies that the way we've communicated back, either the responses were not received or were not clear enough. So that is something we can also follow up with you specifically and understand better how we can improve the process of providing feedback afterwards. But thank you for the question here.
Absolutely. The next questions are in Spanish, and while I would love to attempt to actually accurately translate that, I don't want to do it. So Nelson, I know that you asked a question to me. Can you do that? Yeah. Yeah. Actually, Jessica is just telling me it's in Portuguese, so and she speaks a little bit Portuguese, so she will try to translate it's a comment. Thank you. Portuguese. Sorry.
So thank you, Dawn. This is more a comment, not really a question from Mozambique. So the first comment he submitted was to let us know that about only 10% of the population has some kind of information or knows about hemophilia. So that leaves 90% of the population that has never heard of hemophilia. So that's a big problem, and it's something that they would like to work on to inform the population and raise awareness about hemophilia and other rare bleeding disorders. The second comment, he mentions that he also believes that in the healthcare providers community, there's also a lack of knowledge about hemophilia. And being in a country where they just suffered from a natural catastrophe, he believes that in the region of the northern region of the country, they're suffering also a lot from the consequences of the cyclone that happened, I think, about a month ago, exactly. So he himself, as the president of the NMO, doesn't even know how many people with hemophilia have been affected because of this lack of information.
Oh, yeah. So definitely, I mean, this is a great example of a project. So in this case, you know, and absolutely the devastation from that, it is so difficult to figure out. So there's three things here. There's the general population, there's the healthcare population, or healthcare provider population, and then there's the population of those with bleeding disorders and hemophilia. So in the case of something like this, if you wanted to do a project related to one of those three things, you could do that. One might be education of the general population about hemophilia. In that case, you would give your overall goal. You would talk about how you're going to achieve the goal of education and awareness for the general population. Or, and I say or, not and, because I think that's a big goal. So the other goal might be that you want to educate healthcare providers about hemophilia, and then you would go through the same process. The other thing, the last thing, is another different kind of goal, and that would be to identify a notification system and an identification system to be able to reach the people with bleeding disorders in the country, so that in the case of a natural disaster, you could put a plan in place for emergency. All three of those things are really important, and I'm sure that you would want to do all of them. But in the case of creating a grant request, I think that you would want to do one of those things, because I think tackling all three would be very difficult. And especially as I know most of you are volunteers, it's really hard to dedicate 100% of your time to these grants. Salome, do you have any other comments on that?
No comments on that question. I was reading through the next questions as well here. We have a question about if we can get if the presentation afterwards will be available in Spanish. And the answer is yes. So we're translating the presentations in Spanish and French as well, but also the recording of today's webinar will be available with the audio and the speakers' presentations with subtitles in Spanish and French as well. We hope to have it available in about a week's time. So we will be communicating back to all of you and sending you the link where you can access these presentations.
Perfect. Thank you. And then we also have a question from Lesotho. It's we've just completed our DGP last month, and it was our first project. So we'd like to ask if we are eligible to apply again in this round. Great question.
So after the completion, but we will need to have received also the final reports and cleared the balance, let's say, and concluded the project. So afterwards, the NMOs are eligible to reapply, yes.
Okay, perfect. And then another question from Moses. He didn't want to forget, does WFH have an accounting which they require the NMOs to use, an accounting system? I understand each and every donor have policies apart from GAAP and IFRS. Will the WFH audit the books of the NMOs at the end of the project? And lastly, how many NMOs do you fund per year?
I could answer that question. We don't specifically require an accounting system, so it depends on what are the resources the NMOs that have in their country and what are the common systems used. What we require is in the development in the program guidelines, you will see at the end is that you make sure to have a separate bank account set up for it and to be able to separately track the expenditures for the project. And at the end, once we request either mid-year implementation, so every months. If your project is, let's say, 24 months duration, every 6 months we ask for reports, both narrative and financial. So that would require you keeping track of say copies of receipts, etc., and submitting them. And there is 2 months after the completion of the project, we ask you to submit a final report about the program, both narrative and financial.
And then lastly, how many NMOs do you fund per year? I know last year that was our very first time doing the development grant program, and not everyone received funding. And it does depend on the requests that come in because there is a limited amount of funds. But Salome, do you want to go into a little bit more detail?
So last year we had, from the example of last year, I can say we had funded 8 projects, 8 NMOs. It depends on so we do have a maximum limit of the budget set aside, but it all depends whether all the projects, submitted are for maximum funding or the ones that are submitted vary in the funding request. So it could be anywhere from, 5 to even 15, 20. It can vary significantly, the number, depending on the funding requested from the NMOs. And I have to correct myself on the previous question. For Lesotho, I'm sorry, I did omit one detail for reapplying after the completion of a current development grant program. There is a 1-year waiting period between the applications. The main reason for that is to allow us to support various NMOs and various countries. And also not to create a constant, let's say, dependency on this program. So you would be eligible to apply next year.
Thank you, Salome. And then John asked, does WFH have reports of past grants or programs available, and where can we find them? And that's for purposes of learning from other NMOs' experiences and recommendations. And I think those would be the successful grants.
Thank you, John, for this question. A good question. If you mean specifically of the development grants reports, not yet, because the ones we've awarded the funding were issued last fall at almost the end of the year. So the first reports are due just now this month. So we're now going to start collecting the first reports, the mid-year reports, and we don't have yet any programs completed. But to answer your question, not yet, but we will be writing short stories or some highlights about the project's progress as soon as throughout the year, once we are receiving some reports from different national member organizations. If you need more information on the kind of reporting requested, we do have the reporting template itself, and we could provide that in advance if you're interested to see the kind of reporting that is required and what are the questions we ask on that.
In terms of the financial report, what is specifically required?
So we will send you all the details in the reporting form, and we can also have a call if you have very specific questions on the type of reporting. But basically, what it requires is in the template of the report, you will see that it asks on how the budget was spent. And for the respective expenditures, there should be specific supporting documents provided. This is in general terms, but once we send you the documentation, if you have more questions, so we will be happy to have a call or email exchange with you to provide more clarification.
Excellent questions, everyone.
I wanted to thank you, Dawn, very much for the presentation, and especially thank the participants for their time and for active participation and for submitting to us so many questions.
I want to thank everyone as well. I know we're all over the place with time zones, and I know sometimes it's difficult to be able to call in at a certain time. Please let your fellow NMOs know that this has been recorded and that they can access, like Salome said, this will be translated. And so if you want to, view this again with subtitles, so that I know that I tend to talk very quickly, and I apologize for that. But I hope that everyone was able to understand, and please share it with your other partners out in the world.
I think this concludes our webinar today. We are open to receiving more questions later on. If you had more thoughts and have thought of specific questions that you could not pose today, we hope you will find the information received today useful in developing project proposals for the Development Grant Program or any other funding opportunity that you may be applying for. You saw that the way we've designed the presentations today were according to the application form that we are using for the Development Grant Program. But the key elements for developing a successful application are pretty much the same across different foundations and their funding mechanisms. So this information is relevant for pretty much any other fundraising opportunity that you may be applying for. We ask you that you please complete a brief evaluation of this session. So as soon as we close the session, there will be a window that pops out asking you to complete the evaluation, especially because this is the first time we're organizing a webinar on this specific topic, and we want to hear your feedback, whether the information was useful, did we cover all the topics that you expected to have received information on. Any suggestions, we really very much look forward to them. We want to hear whether you think that this is a good tool and good way to deliver training. You know, we've been holding so many national or regional trainings in person, but is this something that you would be interested for WFH to provide on other topics? It could be project cycle management, or could be on reporting, or any other aspects of the project cycle management in a nutshell. So we will appreciate any feedback we can get from you. And afterwards, if you cannot complete it right away, it is very short, but if you cannot complete it right away, you will receive an email after the webinar, which will also have a link, and you will have a few days time to complete the evaluation. In about a week time, as I said a few minutes ago, we will be able to share a recording of this webinar. So in case you or any of your colleagues who could not attend the webinar today would like to listen to the presentations again, you will have an opportunity. We will also be sharing recordings of the webinar with subtitles in French and Spanish. So you will have presentations and the audio in 3 languages. So once again, thank you very much to Dawn, and thank you very much to all of you for your participation and for joining us.
Thank you all.